Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to the second tutorial for the JustFlight Avro RJ. In this tutorial we are going to deal with the general flight deck setup minus the avionics, which are going to get a dedicated tutorial. So let's get right into it. We are going to start the scan at the top left, and then we are going to continue in a standard scan flow pattern across the panel. So starting up here, we make sure that the yaw damper switches are turned on, the FGC select can stay on number 1, autopilot master, avionics switches are on, lift spoilers on, auto spoilers on, anti-skid is turned on, and the brake fans are off for the time being. Moving further down to the hydraulics panel, we ensure that the engine pump switch is off, and then we're going to turn on the DC pump and observe that the brake pressure indication on the yellow brake pressure is going to rise. When that happens, we know the pump operates and we can turn it back off. Next we do the same with the AC pump, which we are going to turn on, and observe a rise in the yellow hydraulic system pressure. Next, turn on the power transfer unit, and then you will see that the green system pressure is also going to rise. When both of them have been observed to operate correctly, we can turn the PTU back off and the AC pump back off as well. The engine 3 pump stays off for now. Now let's move further down towards the fuel panel. And I will go a little bit to the side again so that it's easier to see the actual switch position. So the cross feed is shut, the center tank transfer is shut, left standby pump normal, common feed shut, right standby pump normal, and if the APU is operating, the left inner pump is on, and apart from that the other fuel pump's off. If the APU is not operating at this moment, because you might be using the external power, then all 4 fuel pumps can remain off. Moving further down, we adjust our glare shield brightness as needed, which is this one over here, which controls the backlighting of the glare shield. Next up, we continue on the electrical panel. The batteries are on, the voltage and amperage selector can remain on either of the 2 batteries, and the AC meter should be set to the power source currently in use, which in our case is the APU generator. Moving further down, external power is needed, bus tie switch is auto, standby inverter arm, standby generator arm. Moving further down, the engine generators are in the off reset position, the galley power is currently shut, and the APU generator is on, provided that the APU is in use. Continuing on the APU panel, APU as needed, in our case on. Now moving down to the engines panel, the start power selector is in the normal, which is the middle position, the engine start selector itself is in off, and the start master is off as well. Going further down, the in-flight start switch is off, continuous ignition off, and the engine starter is in the run position, and the engine anti-ice is off for the time being. Do note that some operators will already turn the engine anti-ice on at this stage in the setup, however most of them only do it a little bit later, which we will cover in the before start procedure. Going further up, we end up on the pressurization panel, and over here we are going to set the landing altitude. In our case, the landing altitude in Hamburg is close to 0, so by just rotating it once, we see LA, landing altitude, which is 0. Moving further down, the manual rate control switch is on auto, the outflow valves are in the normal position, and the ice protection on the ice protection panel, the heaters are all off. Do note that if you are operating in freezing conditions, so if you have, for example, fog with a temperature of 3 degrees or less, or if there is any snow, then the ice protection panel should be turned, or then you should turn on all the heaters over here. Moving further down, the outer wing anti-ice is off, the inner wing de-ice is off, the tail anti-ice is off, and the ice detection switch can already be turned on. So we can open the guard, turn it on, and then close that again. Moving up further to the right, we can start on the very top with the lights. So the top lights are what I would call auxiliary lights. Not normally needed, but fairly useful under certain conditions. During daylight, you can leave them all off. In the night, the logo lights should be turned on, and the wing lights and the entry lights as needed. Going a little bit further down, the cabin emergency lighting will be armed and the no smoking sign can be turned on. Further down, the nav light is on, strobes off, beacon off. Now, also located up here are the ground tests for the engine fire tests. And we are going to give those a try now. So, first things first, before pressing any of these, we are going to ensure that the engine fire switches are in and the fire detection system is set to the loop that will be used on the day. So, even days loop A, odd days loop B. Now let's go ahead and press the switches and see what we are going to observe. First of all, you've got the fire light come up over here, and then we also see the engine 1 fire and the loop 1 fault light illuminate up on the master warning panel. And we're going to check the same for number 2. And the fire light down here on the thrust levers as well. The same for number 3 and for number 4, which are all checked. Don't do the APU fire test while the APU is running. It is going to shut itself down automatically. Alright, moving further down, we've got the air conditioning panel. Over here, the temperature selectors are going to be in auto, and the fans can be turned on as needed. The temperature selectors can be left in the 12 o'clock position, which, as you can see, gives us a cabin temperature of around about 22 degrees, which is just fine. Moving further down across the air conditioning panel, the cabin air is set to fresh. The packs are both on if an air conditioning source such as the APU air is available, otherwise leave your packs off, and the RAM air is shut. Moving further down, APU air on if the APU is indeed available and air conditioning is needed, and the zone temperature detectors will be set to both loops. The engine air needs to be turned off, so this is your bleed air down here. Last but not least, we get down to the annunciator lights, and over here we can press the red or the black button, which conducts an annunciator light test in your cockpit. Next to that, you've got the dimmers for the annunciators, which during daylight should be set fully bright. In the night, I would turn them to a very low setting. You also have the dimmer for the instruments and for the panel backlighting located up here, which you can set as needed. Moving to the forward overhead panel then, we've got the fasten seatbelt sign, which should be turned on as soon as the refueling is completed. You have your windscreen wipers, which should be off unless you are taxiing and the windows are wet. Then you have your landing and taxi light switches, and those need to be in the middle position, which is the off position. So down here you've got the taxi lights, up here you have the landing lights, the middle position is off. The runway exit lights are off, and the flight deck emergency lighting can be armed, so put into the middle position down here. So from here we are going to move forward to the main panel, and we can start this one actually a little bit further to the left with our communications panel, on which we want to do the following selections. First of all, we can do the cockpit voice recorder test and observe that the light is illuminating and flashing green. Then we select the radio on which we want to transmit, VHF1 today, and turn on the volume of all the radios we want to listen to, in our case VHF1 and VHF2. Push it in and you will listen to it, and rotating it controls the volume itself. Moving further down, we've got more panel light switches. So we have the panel floodlight, and we've got the panel instrument lights, which kind of do exactly what the titles say. Controlling the brightness of the instruments and controlling the brightness of the floodlights. From here we can move on to the main panel, and we are going to start at the very bottom, where we turn on the electronic flight instrument system. On the left side, make sure that your timer is set to time, and you can use the 0 switch in order to reset the elapsed timer. That will become important during our takeoff roll. The display brightness is set as needed, including both weather and terrain. And then we can move on to our main panel, where we check that the electronic flight instruments are indicating correctly if the RS alignment has already finished. Moving further to the right, we can set our altimeters, which I'm going to cheat on by just using the B button. And we are going to set the minimum selector to our airfield elevation. Now this will become important after takeoff, where we will use this in order to determine our acceleration height. Moving over to the right, we can align our standby horizon by pulling the lever down here and make sure that our standby altimeter is also set. The different switches down here are all in the guarded position, which is the normal operating position. Moving on to the right, we observe that no FADEC light illuminates, and we observe that sufficient engine oil is loaded up. Moving further down on the panel, we also have our fuel use switches, which we need to reset at this point. So press the reset switch down here, and on the right hand side the reset switch down here, which resets the previous fuel use so that we can do proper fuel checks later on in flight. On the right hand side, the landing gear lever is down, the landing flap selector is on the 33 position, the GPWS is not switched off. In other words, it does not show any indication there. We are going to ignore our thrust rating computer for the time being, we will get to that later on. Moving further to the right hand side, the brightness on the first officer's instruments is set all up, the altimeter is set, and last but not least we can turn on the EFIS Thrustmaster in order to switch on our instruments for the first officer. Moving further to the right, the IRSs are in the nav position, and to the right of our first officer we will find the oxygen valve which we need to open and observe that sufficient pressure exists in the system. Once this is done, we can also test our oxygen masks by putting the manual pressure and test selector down and observing that the cross comes up on the flow indicator. Thereafter we can turn it to the top position. Once we've done that on the FO side, we can also do it on the captain's side over here. So, this moves us down towards the pedestal, and over here the FMS and EFIS switch is in the split position. What this does is you would either control both sides through the left LNAV or through the right LNAV. Moving further down, we can set up our electronic flight instruments. And over here, basically, we want the following switching. We want the format to be the map. You can press the data switch once to bring up the ground speed indication. If you press it again, you bring up the winds, and so on. Today we are just going to take the ground speed and the airports. So, continuing further down, the thrust levers are all in the fuel off position, the trims are centered, and the elevator trim is in the green range. Moving further down, the flight control disconnects are pushed in, and getting down to the radios, we can tune the delivery frequency and pre-select the ground frequency, or if we are flying on VATSIM without ATC, we could, for example, select 1 to 2.8 on COM 1, and on COM 2 we are always going to select 1 to 1.5 active, and on the pre-selector of COM 2 you could go, for example, for the ATIS. Moving down to the transponder panel, we make sure that the altitude reporter is set to the side of the pilot flying, and the same for the transponder switch. So if the captain is flying, we use number 1. If the first officer would be flying, we would be using number 2. Today, the captain is pilot flying, so we are going to use the number 1 side. The traffic selector goes into the above position, and our squawk by default should be 2000. Last but not least, we can set our TCAS range. 12 miles is a good setting in my opinion, as it allows you to see a lot of the approaching aircraft, so that you can make a proper decision if you want to line up on the runway or not, provided that you don't have air traffic control available. The brake temperatures are showing something sensible, and the ELT is in the guarded position. Moving to the right hand side, we are going to deal with the ADFs later. The flight data recorder can be put to the ground test position, and the fail light goes out, and when we release the switch again, the fail light comes back on. The flight deck door should be unlocked at this moment, and we can set our lights again as needed. Well, this concludes our initial flight deck setup for the Avro RJ. Now, next up we are going to deal with the avionics, but those will be in a dedicated separate tutorial. I would like to thank you very much for watching, hope that you have learned something today. As always, be sure to leave your feedback underneath the video. Like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.